It started with a flower, small, harmless, and beautiful. People said it could ease pain, calm the mind, and help you sleep. But before long, that same flower turned into the most powerful drug on earth, one that brought empires to their knees. From farmers in India growing poppies for a few coins, to British traders loading ships full of opium, to Chinese families watching their loved ones fade away, the trade spread fast, unstoppable. It wasn't just about money, it was about control. And soon, the smoke of addiction was thicker than the fog of war. Who do you blame, the dealers, the kings, or the world that looked away? Comment. The time you're watching this morning, late night, or somewhere in between. And if you like history, told like a real story, not a textbook, hit subscribe. No pressure. But the next one's even wilder. You wake up in a field that smells like sleep itself. Warm earth-crushed petals, and that faint, almost honey-sweet scent drifting from the poppies. Their red heads sway lazily, as if they've seen this story begin 1,000 times before. And maybe they have. You crouch down and notice the strange, milky sap oozing from a small cut in one of the pods. Sticky, pale, innocent looking. But that drop right there, that's the start of the world's most elegant disaster. Thousands of years ago, think ancient Sumerians around 3400 BC people called this plant the joy plant. You can almost imagine them saying it out loud after a long day in the blazing Mesopotamian sun. Let's see what the poppy has to say tonight. They didn't have anesthesia, no ibuprofen, not even the comfort of modern excuses like, I'm just tired. What they had was this little capsule of mercy, a tiny god that could hush pain, smooth over sorrow, and let sleep roll in like a warm tide. Picture it. You're an ancient farmer in the land between two rivers. Your back screams from endless labor, and someone hands you a crude clay cup with poppy juice diluted in wine. You sip, and your muscles stop fighting. Your thoughts slow down until even time seems to yawn. You wouldn't call it addiction, because the word doesn't exist yet. You'd call it peace. It doesn't take long for priests and healers to notice the magic. Clay tablets found in Sumer and later Akkad in Babylon record how poppy extracts soothed crying babies, eased headaches, and even acted as a gift to the gods. In a world where pain was constant and gods were unpredictable, this plant looked like divine generosity in floral form. But every gift carries a clause, doesn't it? By the time you reach ancient Egypt, poppy fields stretch along the Nile like crimson brushed strokes. The Egyptians mix opium into potions for sleep, for sadness, for the wounded. Even the great Ramses II's tomb mentions the plant's trade. Doctors in linen robes measure doses by the grain, and mothers hum lullabies with a trace of opium in the milk. For the child's calm, they'd say. You can almost see the irony. The very empire that built monuments to eternity also brewed the seeds of forgetfulness. Then the Greeks arrive, curious and confident. You follow them into their marble courtyards, where philosophers argue about virtue, while someone quietly drops a poppy extract into the evening wine. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, himself writes about it, calling it a useful sedative, the warning against excess. Yet you know how humans are with warnings. Just a little more has always been our favorite phrase. The goddess of sleep, Nyx and her son Morpheus, yes, that's where morphine gets its name, are often painted with poppy crowns. The ancients practically turned narcotics into art supplies. Fast forward to Rome, where legions march with pain in their bones, and apothecaries stock vials labeled Opium Thebaicum, Theban opium, named after Thebes in Egypt. Roman doctors like Galen prescribe it for everything from coughs to heartache. Meanwhile, emperors chase glory, while their citizens chase sleep. It's a strange parallel. One builds empires, the other escapes them. You might smile at the idea that even Caesar's Rome had an early version of the pharmacy. Walk into a Roman market, and you could buy a dose wrapped in linen maybe to ease a toothache, or to forget that your rent's due to some senator's nephew. The crowd didn't talk about substance abuse. They talked about remedy. It's funny how language makes monsters, or angels depending on what century you live in. And of course, pain was not the only thing opium dulled. It also softened grief. Widows, soldiers, and poets all learned that the poppy could blur memories the way fog blurs the horizon. The poet Ovid called sleep the brother of death, and the poppy became their shared pillow. Ever wonder why so many ancient myths link dreams, death, and flowers? It's not poetic coincidence, it's pharmacology, hiding in verse. The poppy doesn't shout, it whispers. It convinces you that the world can wait, that wounds can pause. And for early civilizations, constantly bleeding through war, famine, childbirth, it was a whisper worth obeying. Still, even in those early centuries, someone must have noticed how the joy plant could turn its smile. Maybe a Sumerian father who couldn't wake his son the next morning. Maybe a Roman healer who saw patients coming back for more and more long after their pain had gone. You can almost hear the thought flicker across time. How much peace is too much? That's the question hanging in the air as the field around you fades, replaced by the glow of new empires. You're about to see what happens when a quiet medicine leaves the healer's hand and enters the merchant's ledger when the flower of sleep learns how to travel. You find yourself on a wooden ship, rocking gently over blue water, the air thick with the smell of salt sweat, and something sweeter. Poppies, the jars tied down on deck, carry that same milky sap you saw dripping in Mesopotamia. Only now, it's packed, priced, and sailing across the world. What started as a healer's secret is slowly turning into big business. Empires, it turns out, love anything that makes people quiet. Egypt ships opium north to Crete, Greece, and Rome. The Greeks mix it into their wine. The Romans pour it into their medicine. And somewhere along the way, everyone decides this sleepy flower deserves a place in every home. You pass a Greek doctor in a linen robe, sweating under the sun, muttering to himself as he stirs a mix of herbs and sap. He looks tired, but proud. He thinks he's saving lives, and in a way, he is. That's the thing about opium. It works. Pain vanishes, grief fades, and sleep comes so quickly, it feels like forgiveness. Even the great Hippocrates mentions it, calling it useful, but warning that too much could kill. Of course, people heard only the first part. Useful. Isn't that tad? Hay's most bad habits start by the time the Romans come along. They've turned opium into their own kind of magic. Picture a Roman market stall, baskets of olives, clay jars of wine, and a small linen pouch of something called Opium Thebaicum. The seller winks and says, For pain, for sleep, for whatever you need. The empire runs on discipline by day and forgetfulness by night. You can't help but laugh. Humans haven't changed much, have we? We still find ways to buy comfort and call it medicine. Roman generals carry opium on campaigns. Gladiators use it for wounds. Poets take it to soften heartbreak. Even emperors aren't immune. The same man who commands armies can't command his own insomnia. So, he drinks poppy tea, feels the edge dull, and drifts away. The empire grows and quietly numbs itself. Then the centuries turn, and the torch passes east. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars in Baghdad and Cairo start studying everything from stars to medicine. One of them, Avicenna, writes about opium with the calm honesty of someone who knows both its power and its danger. He calls it a healer and a destroyer. You imagine him hunched over his manuscripts, candlelight flickering across jars of herbs, probably knowing his words will outlive him, and they do. His medical books travel west, copied by monks, studied by doctors, whispered through centuries. Meanwhile, merchants along the Silk Road are doing what they do best, turning medicine into money. You follow a caravan, trudging across dusty Persia. Silk spices ivory, and tucked inside a saddlebag, little balls of opium. It's worth more than gold in the right place. Every stop along the route, another city gets hooked. A soldier in Arabia, a healer in India, a monk in Venice. They all swear it helps, and it does until it helps too much. Walk into a medieval apothecary in Venice and you'll see it clearly. The shelves are lined with jars, each labeled in careful Latin, but one stands out, the one with the poppy mark. The merchant behind the counter looks at you, smiles and says, "For pain, my friend, always sells." He's not wrong. The world runs on pain, and there's always someone selling the cure. You start to realize the poppy doesn't belong to one culture anymore. It's everywhere. The Greeks praised it. The Romans sold it. The Arabs studied it. The Indians grew it. The Chinese would soon smoke it. It crosses borders easier than any army ever could. And through it all, nobody sees it as a problem yet. It's medicine, a blessing from nature, a way to stop the hurting. After all, who would question a flower that helps people sleep? You lean back on that ship again, watching the waves slap against the hull. The sailors talk about trade winds and profit margins, but what they're really carrying is peace in a bottle and a quiet storm waiting to break. Because once the poppy starts moving with the merchants, it stops being a healer. It starts becoming history's most elegant trap. You step off the ship and into a world that smells like spice dust and heat, the trade routes of Persia and India, where caravans crawl like ants across the desert. Bells jingle on camels, merchants argue in half a dozen languages, and tucked deep inside a wooden chest sits the same familiar thing, a small leather pouch filled with poppy sap, dried and dark. You realize it's traveled farther than most kings ever will. Here, opium isn't just a medicine anymore. It's a kind of currency. The Persians trade it for silk and gold. The Indians mix it into potions and prayers, and the Arabs carry it westward, calling it Opium. The name sticks. So does the habit. People sip it in tea, sprinkle it in food, even burn it in ceremonies to calm the spirits. Somewhere along the line between healing and ritual disappears completely. Picture an Indian apothecary in the Mughal Empire. A wooden table, jars of herbs, powders, and poppy resin, the color of old honey. A healer grinds it with mortar and pestle, his movements practiced and gentle. He's not trying to sell anything. He's trying to help. A mother waits beside him with her sick child, desperate for relief. When she finally sees her little one stop crying, she thanks him with tears in her eyes. And that's how it spreads, not through greed, but through gratitude. But trade has a way of twisting good intentions. Once the Mughal court realizes how much profit hides inside a poppy pod, they begin to tax it, regulate it, and soon enough monopolize it. The British will learn from this later. But right now, it's the local merchants who are getting rich. Imagine them at the port of Surat, their warehouses stacked with sacks of opium bricks stamped with royal seals ready for export. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the future creaking open. As caravans push toward the east, the poppy finds China. At first, the Chinese use it like everyone else as medicine. It's mixed with tea to ease coughs or brewed to dull pain. But a clever twist happens. Someone discovers that when you dry the sap and heat it over a flame, it turns into smoke that makes your thoughts float. You don't swallow it anymore, you inhale it, and with that one change, the poppy becomes something new. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before it became a smoke-filled empire's problem, opium was a traveler's best companion. Along the Silk Road, you'd see merchants swapping it like coin priests, carrying it for visions, and soldiers using it for courage before battle. Even Marco Polo might have seen its trail, though he never wrote about it. If he had, he'd probably have called it a miracle and a curse wrapped in one flower. You sit by a campfire one night with a caravan master from Bukhara. He tells you stories of how opium can open the gates of heaven when taken properly. His eyes gleam in the firelight. He's not lying, he truly believes it. You think about how every culture has its version of escape. Some pray, some drink, some dream through a puff of smoke. And somehow, they all say it's for peace. The irony is, while the poppy is traveling east on camelback Christianity, is spreading west through missionaries, two kinds of salvation, crossing paths, neither aware of the other. If one promises eternal peace, the other offers temporary mercy. You can't help but wonder which one the world will chase harder. Even the doctors of the time begin to notice the problem. Some Persian physicians warn that overuse makes men weak in spirit, unable to feel joy without the drug. Their notes sound eerily modern, like early versions of addiction research. Yet, nothing changes. How could it? When pain exists, so will the need to silence it. By now, opium has slipped into every corner of life, ritual medicine, trade, comfort. Its jars sit beside spices in the market, beside prayer beads, in temples, beside gold and treasuries. The poppy isn't just a plant anymore. It's a passport. Wherever it goes, it buys you sleep power, or both. You watch one last caravan fade into the horizon, the camels bobbing under their loads, the traders' laughter echoing into the night. They have no idea they're carrying the future's first global addiction disguised as a miracle cure. The first thing you notice is the smell, thick, sweet, almost floral, hanging in the air of a tea house somewhere in 17th century China. You push through the haze and see them, men in silk robes reclining on bamboo couches, eyes half closed, the soft crackle of burning opium filling the silence. Welcome to the empire that thought it could outsmart the flower. Spoiler, it couldn't. Imagine watching one of the world's most powerful civilizations slowly trade its discipline for a dream, one puff at a time. It doesn't happen overnight. It begins quietly, almost politely, with doctors prescribing poppy mixtures for pain insomnia and coughs. But then, Portuguese traders arrive in the 1500s, followed by the Dutch, and finally the British. They don't just bring spices and silk, they bring refinement and greed. By the Ming Dynasty, opium is still medicine, but by the Qing era, people start smoking it mixed with tobacco. The effect is instant and irresistible. It's faster, warmer, and more soothing than anything swallowed from a cup. The body relaxes, the mind floats, and the heart forgets. And once forgetting becomes easy, control becomes impossible. At first, it's the rich who indulge. Scholars, officials, even poets. Smoking opium is like sipping an expensive wine done slowly, elegantly, under the illusion of taste. Some call it chasing the dragon, because the smoke twists and curls like a creature from a dream. But dragons, as every legend warns, always demand something in return. The emperor notices. By the early 1700s, the Qing court is getting nervous. Edicts are written, bans are issued, and still the smoke rises. Prohibit the sale of foreign opium, they command. But merchants, clever as ever, find loopholes. They smuggle it in with tea, hide it under rice sacks, and label it as medicine. You can almost hear the excuses echo through history. It's just for trade, not for use. It helps people relax. It's harmless in small doses. Sound familiar? Soon the problem isn't just indulgence, it's economy. China loves silver, but the West loves tea. So British traders start paying for tea with opium instead of coins. The more the Chinese buy, the more silver drains from their treasury. The math is cruel. China gets weaker with every puff, while Britain gets richer with every shipment. You stand on a dock in Canton and watch the exchange bales of tea for chests of opium, smiles, for silence, civilization, for dependency. Imagine being one of those Chinese officials writing report after report to the emperor. You warn that addiction is spreading through villages, soldiers, even the royal guards. You argue that the country is bleeding both silver and strength. But by the time anyone listens, it's already too late. The poppy has slipped through the empire's fingers like smoke. And yet, for the common people, it's not about politics. It's about survival. Life is hard. Famines, taxes, endless wars. A few puffs after work make the world softer, quieter. Who can blame them? You see a fisherman lighting his pipe by the river, his hands rough, his eyes tired. He takes a breath, exhales slowly, and for a moment, he looks at peace. That's how it always starts, just a moment. Inside the opium dens, time stops, lamps glow dimly, laughter fades to murmurs. You can almost hear the heartbeat of an empire slowing down. The irony is brutal. This is the same civilization that invented paper gunpowder and the compass. A nation that once led the world in innovation now drifts in a dream it can't wake from. Even the emperor's advisors can't stay clean. Rumor has it, some high officials smoke before meetings. You imagine the awkward silence when the emperor demands an explanation. Eyes read words, slow promises, made and forgotten by morning. It's not just a health crisis, it's a spiritual collapse. Meanwhile, outside the palace, ships from Britain keep docking their cargo holds stacked high with opium grown in India. The East India Company smiles behind polite treaties and sharp contracts. You realize what's happening. The British aren't just selling a product, they're building dependence. A quiet war, waged not with soldiers, but with smoke. And as the haze thickens across the empire, one question lingers in your mind. What happens when the world's strongest nation wakes up and realizes its dreams were imported? You stand at the edge of a crowded port in Calcutta, where the air hums with the sound of coins, clinking crates thudding, and men shouting in English, Bengali, and Chinese. It's the 18th century now, and the British East India Company has discovered what every empire eventually does, that the fastest way to control the world isn't through war, but through addiction. The British don't grow poppies for medicine anymore. They grow them for profit. In Bengal's sun-baked fields, entire villages are forced to cultivate the flower, their rice paddies replaced by rows of green stalks, topped with pale pods. You walk past one farmer, his back bent, his face hollow, and you realize he doesn't own what he grows. The company does. They give him just enough silver to survive and just enough fear to stay obedient. The poppy fields stretch to the horizon, glistening with latex tears. You might think you're looking at a farm, but really, you're standing in the middle of the world's first narco-industrial complex. The company buys the sap, bakes it into bricks, seals it in chests, and ships it east to Canton. It's a system so cleanly organized, you almost have to admire the evil of it. Imagine a boardroom in London-polished wood tables, white wigs, and men congratulating themselves on record profits. They don't call it opium, they call it trade goods. They sip tea bought with the very opium that's beginning to poison China and toast to economic prosperity. You can't help but smirk. It's the politest drug cartel in history. Meanwhile, back in India, British officers treat opium like liquid gold. They guard warehouses like temples and hire local merchants to move the product quietly through ports and rivers. Officially, it's illegal to sell opium in China. Unofficially, everyone knows what's going on. The smugglers are protected. The taxes roll in, and the addiction grows like a shadow no one can stop. You take a slow walk through one of those factories in Patna, where workers knead brown, sticky opium into perfect bricks under the watch of British supervisors. The smell is overwhelming, sweet, sour, dizzying. One man scoops the mixture into molds, while another stamps it with a seal, Bengal opium. It's almost funny how bureaucracy can make poison sound professional. And here's where things get personal. You see a Chinese merchant standing at the dock counting his payment. He's not a villain. He's just trying to feed his family, same as everyone else. He doesn't think about how the drug will travel through hands, through pipes, through veins. The harm feels distant until it's not, because soon the silver stops flowing to China and starts flowing out. In less than a generation, the empire goes from wealthy to desperate. The numbers don't lie. Millions of silver taels drained millions of lives, blurred into dependency. And yet, the British keep smiling, calling it free trade. You almost want to shout, free for who? Then you remember the British Empire doesn't run on fairness. It runs on balance sheets. They're not selling opium to destroy China. They're selling it to fund themselves. The profits build railways, ships, and armies. Every puff in a Canton tea house pays for another British cannon somewhere else. Picture this, a single poppy field in India funding the expansion of an empire that claims to bring civilization to the world. A perfect irony. The same flower that makes people forget becomes the foundation of Britain's memory, etched into its museums, its mansions, its global power. And what about the people in those poppy villages? The ones who once grew rice and now grow ruin. They don't see the money. Their children go hungry, while ships leave the harbor carrying wealth that will never return. You can almost hear the whisper of the poppies in the wind, soft, sad, and endless. By the early 1800s, the British are shipping over 1,400 tons of opium a year into China. That's not trade, that's invasion without gunfire. The Chinese emperor sends warnings. The British send more boats, and the whole system keeps turning. Everyone's making money. No one's sleeping at night. You stand there, watching the sunset. Over the Bengal fields, the flowers glowing like tiny lanterns in the dusk. They look beautiful from a distance, peaceful, even holy. But up close, you see the truth. Every drop of sap here is another piece of China's soul being sold overseas. And somewhere on the other side of the sea, an emperor is about to wake up to the biggest betrayal in his empire's history. The cannons came before dawn. You hear them before you see them. The deep chest-rattling thunder rolling across the Pearl River Delta. British warships glide through the mist like steel ghosts, their Union Jacks fluttering against the pale sky. This isn't trade anymore. This is punishment. The Opium Wars have begun. China had finally said enough. Emperor Daoguang, exhausted by the country's addiction and the bleeding of its silver reserves, sent one of his most trusted officials, Lin Zexu, to Canton to put an end to the opium crisis once and for all. You can picture him, upright posture, sharp eyes, a man who actually believes laws still mean something. In 1839, he orders every chest of opium seized and destroyed, nearly 3 million pounds of it. The British merchants are furious. The emperor calls it justice. London calls it bad for business. And just like that, the world's first drug war becomes a real one. The British ships, sleek and ironclad, meet the Chinese junks, wooden, slow. Beautiful, but hopelessly outmatched. You stand on the shore as the first cannonballs land, plumes of water erupting the air thick with gunpowder and irony. China is fighting to stay sober. Britain is fighting to stay rich. The war lasts 3 years, but the outcome is decided in 3 weeks. Technology always wins over tradition. When it's over, China signs the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, and you can almost hear the heartbreak in the ink. The treaty forces China to open 5 ports to British trade, hand over Hong Kong, and pay millions in silver as compensation. Think about that. Britain sells the drugs, China destroys them, and China ends up paying for it. If it weren't real, It would sound like a cruel joke. And yet, that's how empires operate. They turn moral outrage into financial opportunity. The British argue it's about free trade and open markets, but what they really mean is you'll take our opium, whether you like it or not. You wander through Canton after the war. The streets are quieter, but not cleaner. The opium dens are still full. Men lie in rows, pipes glowing faintly, eyes glassy. The government bans it again and again, but the merchants always find a way. Every time someone closes a port, another opens. Every time an official cracks down, another one takes a bribe. It's not just smoke filling the air. It's corruption, despair, and shame, and the British. They keep sending more. They even find new allies in America, where Boston traders, yes, the same city that once dumped tea into a harbor to protest unfair trade, now ship opium under their own flags. Funny how principles shrink when profit grows. Then comes the Second Opium War 20 years later. China tries again to resist, but this time Britain brings France along for the ride. It's not just about drugs anymore. It's about dominance. They burn the Summer Palace, loot priceless treasures, and force China to legalize opium entirely. You can almost hear the world laughing at the irony a ban turned into a business license. Meanwhile, in London, Parliament debates moral responsibility. Some politicians call the trade a stain on the empire. Others call it a necessary evil. You think about how convenient those words sound when you're sitting far from the consequences. The poppies still grow in India. The ships still sail. The Chinese still smoke. And here's where it gets personal again. You meet a Chinese soldier in a small riverside village. His uniform is torn, his hands shaking not from fear, but from withdrawal. He tells you he hasn't fought in days. He can't focus. His mind is fog, his one begging for another puff. He doesn't hate the British, he hates himself. You want to tell him it's not his fault, but history rarely offers mercy. You look at the empire from above, now a vast ancient civilization, brought to its knees not by invasion, but by indulgence. The Great Wall couldn't keep out a flower, and somewhere in London a young Queen Victoria reads the reports and frowns at the cruelty, but the ships keep leaving anyway. You can almost imagine her saying, "It's regrettable," as if regret could wash away empire's fingerprints. By the time the wars end, opium is legal in China. The addicts number in the millions. The British control the trade routes, the ports, and the prices. And the Chinese government, humiliated and broken, signs one more treaty, this one guaranteeing that foreign powers can do business freely within its borders. So, when people later ask, how did the West conquer the East? You'll remember it wasn't muskets or missionaries that did it. It was the quiet hiss of a pipe in a Canton tea house and the flower that promised peace while selling surrender. You walk into a 19th century laboratory that smells like vinegar, metal, and ambition. Chim Dunli, a chemist in a rumpled coat, leans over a bubbling flask, and with one twist of glass and fire, he changes the world. The war for empires might be fading, but the war for pain relief is just beginning. It's 1803 in Germany, and a young apothecary named Friedrich Serturner has done something extraordinary. He isolates the active ingredient from opium, the thing that makes you float, forget and feel nothing, and names it morphine after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. A poetic choice, really, considering how quickly those dreams would turn into nightmares. You can almost hear Sir Turner's pride as he announces his discovery to the world, a cleaner, safer, more scientific version of opium. He imagines hospitals free of agony soldiers who can sleep through surgery, mothers who can give birth without screaming. It's a miracle, or at least it looks like one. What he doesn't realize is that he's just concentrated thousands of years of temptation into a single drop. By the mid-1800s, morphine spreads like wildfire across Europe and America. Doctors love it. They call it God's own medicine. You see it everywhere, packed in glass vials prescribed for coughs, toothaches, anxiety, even broken hearts. During the U.S. Civil War, surgeons carry it into battle, injecting it into wounded soldiers with shiny new inventions called hypodermic needles. It's faster, cleaner, and more potent than anything humanity has ever used. But after the battle's end, something strange happens. The soldiers go home and keep craving it. Some call it the soldier's disease. Others just call it dependence. You can almost picture the heartbreak men who survived cannon fire, now fighting their own bodies for control. They're heroes in public, but prisoners in private. And the thing about morphine, it doesn't judge. It comforts everyone equally. Writers like Coleridge and De Quincey sing its praises, painting it as a gateway to creative heaven. De Quincey even writes Confessions of an English Opium Eater, turning addiction into literature. He describes floating through colors, thoughts, and dreams that feel divine, but you standing in the background can tell it's not heaven he's describing. It's the first layer of hell disguised as art. Hospitals begin to notice the same pattern. Patients heal physically, but return weeks later, hollow-eyed and trembling. Doctors, still blinded by science's optimism, shrug and say, they just need another dose. You almost want to shout, no, they need distance. But back then, nobody wants distance from a miracle. Then in 1853, another German invention arrives, the hypodermic syringe. Suddenly, morphine doesn't have to be swallowed. It can go straight into the bloodstream. Faster relief, deeper sleep, instant euphoria. You know what that means, faster addiction. Humanity has just given temptation a silver needle. Imagine a Victorian living room, velvet curtains, soft music, and a lady in lace reclining on a chaise with a syringe beside her. She's not ashamed. This isn't the dark alley kind of addiction. It's chic, even fashionable. The rich can afford to numb themselves in elegance, while the poor chase the same feeling with cruder tools. The divide between class and craving gets sharper, but the emptiness looks the same in everyone's eyes. Across the ocean, America follows the trend. Morphines everywhere, pharmacies, hospitals, even baby formulas. That's right, 19th century mothers are spoon-feeding diluted opiates to their infants to help them sleep. It's horrifying now. But at the time, it felt like progress. Nobody thought something legal bottled and doctor approved could possibly be dangerous. Even wars keep feeding the habit. The Franco-Prussian War, the Crimean War, the American Civil War, all become morphine factories in disguise. Soldiers leave battlefields scarred and numb, and the only thing that brings comfort is the same thing that took their control. Pain and peace start sounding like the same word. By the 1870s, pharmacists try to find safer alternatives. They experiment, refine, and invent, believing science can outsmart addiction. You can almost see them hunched over their tables, muttering, "We'll make a version that heals but doesn't hook." The irony is thick enough to taste, because the next thing they create will make Opium's legacy look tame. You stand by the chemist's desk as he labels a new vial diacetyl morphine. A German company named Bayer will soon give it a prettier name, heroin. They think it means heroic, as in stronger, purer, more beneficial. And maybe for a brief shining moment it is. But if the poppy had a sense of humor, this would be its cruelest joke yet. The world is about to learn that every miracle cure carries a hidden clause, and every dream has its price. You open your eyes to a dim alleyway in 1900s London, damp stone walls, glistening under gaslight. A man in a bowler hat slips something small into his coat pocket. A vial labeled in neat German letters, heroin. The name sounds noble, even trustworthy. That's how you know it's dangerous. When Bayer first introduced heroin in 1898, they advertised it as a medical breakthrough. A safe, non-addictive substitute for morphine, the pamphlets boasted. Doctors applauded, newspapers praised, and pharmacies lined their shelves with neat brown bottles promising gentle sleep and painless days. You can almost picture the slogan, "Science conquers suffering." It sounds perfect until it doesn't. At first, heroin works beautifully. Coughs vanish, pain dissolves, and anxiety feels like something that only happens to other people. It becomes the new wonder drug for everyone from soldiers to socialites. Even children's cough syrups contain small doses, because who would question a cure from a company that also makes aspirin? But then something shifts. People start coming back, not sick, just restless. They say they can't sleep without it, can't think without it, can't stop reaching for it. The miracle fades into dependence faster than anyone expected. The doctors, who once called it harmless, start avoiding eye contact when patients ask for more. It's morphine all over again, only stronger, faster, and far more seductive. You walk through the back rooms of London's working-class districts. The air smells like vinegar smoke and desperation. A factory worker coughs into his sleeve, his veins faintly blue beneath the skin. He used to take heroin for energy, but now he can't work without it. The same goes for artists, soldiers, mothers, priests. No one's immune. The flower that started in Sumer's fields now hides in syringes under factory lights. By the 1920s, governments start to panic. Addiction isn't just a whisper anymore, it's a roar. Newspapers print stories of heroin fiends and morphine madness. America passes the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act in 1914, tightening control, while Britain and others follow suit. But prohibition has never been good at killing desire. It just drives it underground. And underground, heroin thrives. You walk into a New York tenement basement, the sound of jazz trickling through the cracks above. A few men huddle around a small flame, melting crystals and spoons. Their faces are calm, too calm. The rhythm of the city, the chaos, the hunger, the ambition slows to nothing for them. One inhale, and the world turns soft again. It's the same promise the poppy made thousands of years ago. Forget for a while. The underground grows fast, brothels, ports, gambling halls, anywhere loneliness lingers. You see soldiers from World War I returning home with both medals and habits. You see doctors writing fake prescriptions to keep up with their own cravings. You see families keeping quiet, ashamed to admit their medicine has become their master. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, something new begins to rise. In Shanghai, opium dens evolve into sleek velvet-lined rooms where the wealthy and the poor lie side by side, breathing the same smoky air. The British are no longer the only ones profiting now, it's global. China, once the biggest victim, becomes a hub for processing and smuggling. You can almost smell the irony mixed with the incense. The trade routes shift again. The old imperial ships are gone, replaced by freighters and trains. Opium becomes heroin. The dens become networks. The users become statistics. But the story stays the same. Demand never dies, it just changes form. And if you listen carefully, you can hear the echo of the old excuses from centuries past. It's not that bad. It's just for relief. I can stop whenever I want. The only thing new is the syringe, not the story. You pass by a police raid in Paris, sirens wailing through the narrow streets. The officers seize powder burn evidence and drag away men whose only crime is being addicted to relief. You realize the fight has changed sides. Once governments sold opium. Now they're chasing the ghosts they unleashed. By the late 1930s, heroin goes from being medicine to menace. It's outlawed almost everywhere, but that doesn't stop it. The supply moves from pharmacies to criminal empires, mafias, syndicates, smugglers who learned from history better than any historian. They don't wear crowns or uniforms, but they rule just as effectively. And in a twist, history loves to repeat the war on drugs, becomes its own addiction. Money for enforcement, power for politics, fear for the public. Everyone's hooked on something. You take one last look around that dim alley, the same one where the man in the bowler hat once pocketed his vial. A century has passed, but the pattern hasn't broken. The poppy may have changed its costume, but it's still the same performer whispering comfort while quietly collecting souls. The jungle hums with insects and secrets. You're flying low over mist-covered mountains, the helicopter's blades slicing through the heavy air of Southeast Asia. Below, the fields stretch like a green quilt, stitched with white dots. The poppy blooms again. Only this time, it's not an emperor or a merchant reaping the profits. It's spies. Welcome to the Cold War, where the new empire isn't built on colonies, but on covert operations. The world has just survived 2 global wars, and every superpower is hungry for control. Somewhere between Laos, Burma, and northern Thailand lies the Golden Triangle, the world's most notorious opium zone. And in the haze of these valleys, the same old flower funds a brand new kind of conflict. You land near a bamboo hut where a man in American fatigues is sipping coffee. He doesn't look like a farmer, but he sure sounds like one when he says it's all about supply lines. You realize he's CIA, and supply lines is code for drug routes. During the 1950s and 60s, the CIA backs anti-communist forces in the region, local warlords who conveniently control the opium fields. Officially, it's about stopping the spread of communism. Unofficially, it's about keeping influence in Asia. the soldiers they fund. Paid partly in opium, the planes they fly sometimes carry extra cargo, and the profits, well, those find their way into black budgets that never make it into the history books. It's a perfect irony. While America fights a moral war against drugs at home, it's quietly using them abroad to buy loyalty. You can almost hear the ghost of the British East India Company laughing. Different uniforms, same logic. Control the trade, control the world. Meanwhile, back in the US, heroin finds a new audience: soldiers in Vietnam. Some estimates say nearly 1 in 5 American troops become addicted overseas. You imagine them boys, barely out of high school, lost in a war they don't understand, finding temporary peace in the same poison that once haunted China. When they come home, the country calls them heroes by day and junkies by night. History has a cruel sense of repetition. In the streets of New York, Harlem, and Los Angeles, heroin becomes the soundtrack of a generation. Jazz clubs hum with melancholy melodies, the music itself bending like smoke. You pass by a saxophonist leaning against a brick wall, his eyes closed, horn silent. "It helps me play softer," he mutters. You're not sure if he's talking about the drug or the pain. The 1970s bring the war on drugs, a phrase that sounds noble, until you realize it's more about politics than healing. Presidents promise to clean up the streets, but the arrests fall mostly on the poor and the powerless. The rich still find their medicine in prescriptions. The rest find it in alleys. The cycle tightens, familiar and cruel. And through all of this, the Golden Triangle thrives. Its jungles become laboratories, its rivers smuggling roots, its kings not emperors, but warlords Kunsalo Singhan men who rule with cash and charisma. You picture Kun Sa standing on a ridge, surveying his poppy fields like a general watching over soldiers. He calls himself a patriot. Everyone calls him the Opium King. His product funds armies, feeds families, fuels revolutions. Once again, pain has an economy. The CIA eventually cuts ties, but by then, the system is too big to stop. The trade flows north into Hong Kong, into Europe, into the veins of anyone trying to forget the century they were born into. Governments burn fields, arrest dealers, hold press conferences, but the poppy just grows somewhere else. You can't fight a plant that's learned to thrive wherever people suffer. By the 1980s, another region joins the game: Afghanistan. The Soviets invade, the Americans fund the rebels, and guess what helps pay for the bullets? Opium. The fields bloom under the same skies that rain bombs. You stand there in the dust watching a farmer slice his pods open while fighter jets roar overhead. He doesn't care who wins the war. He just needs to feed his children. And that's the truth beneath every grand headline, every secret file. Behind every empire, there's someone smaller, someone tired, hungry, just trying to survive. The poppy doesn't care about politics. It just grows where pain is plenty. As the century closes, the Golden Triangle starts losing its monopoly, but not its legend. You can still find the echoes in songs, in photographs, in the way the world looks at addiction as both tragedy and taboo. The soldiers are gone. The spies retired. But the same deal continues under new names. And somewhere deep in the mountains, under a sun that never asks questions, the fields sway again. The air smells like sweetness and sorrow, and you can almost hear history whisper, "We never stopped chasing the dragon. We just changed where we looked." You wake up in a clean, modern hospital room. White walls, bright lights, a gentle beep from a heart monitor. On the counter sits a small orange bottle labeled fentanyl 100 micrograms per dose. And that's when it hits you. The story never ended. It just changed outfits. The poppy's still here. Only now, it wears a lab coat. Scientists once promised to make painkillers that would free humanity from suffering without the danger of addiction. The result: synthetic opioids pain relief, engineered in a lab precise and powerful. They called them miracles. History calls them déjà vu. It starts innocently enough, as it always does. A doctor in a rural clinic wants to help a patient with back pain. A nurse in a small-town hospital wants to ease someone's recovery after surgery. The pills work beautifully, too beautifully. You take one, and the pain melts. You take another, and the world feels lighter. Before long, you're not chasing relief anymore. You're chasing the memory of it. The 1990s become the age of pain management. Pharmaceutical companies flood the market with opioids, OxyContin, Vicodin, fentanyl, advertising them as safe, modern, humane. Glossy brochures show smiling patients gardening, golfing, living pain-free lives. The sales reps assure doctors less than 1% of patients become addicted. It sounds scientific. It's a lie. You walk through the heartland of America, through small towns with empty factories and bright neon pharmacies. The jobs are gone, the backs are broken, and the pills are everywhere. Bottles clink in lunchboxes next to sandwiches. Grandmothers take them for arthritis. Teenagers steal them for weekends. Nobody sees it as dangerous. It's prescribed. It's legal. It's blessed by science. Until the refills stop, and the pain doesn't. That's when heroin sneaks back in cheap and ready. The same old poison, just wearing a hoodie instead of a suit. People who once swore they'd never touch a street drug find themselves buying powder from the same corners their parents warned them about. The poppy doesn't care who you are. It just waits for the right ache. Then, fentanyl arrives, the chemical ghost of morphine, 50 times stronger, invisible, and nearly impossible to control. It was supposed to stay in hospitals for surgeries and emergencies. But chemists in hidden labs realize they can make it faster and cheaper than ever before. A few grains of powder, smaller than a pinhead, can kill. You can't see it, you can't smell it, and once it's out there, you can't stop it. You stand in a morgue lit by cold, fluorescent light. A coroner shakes his head as he zips another bag. "It's everywhere," he says softly. "Every pill, every batch. It could be anything now." You think about how far the story has traveled, from Sumerian priests to Victorian doctors to street dealers with counterfeit tablets. Different centuries, same silence. And yet, amid the tragedy, there's something human and heartbreaking at the center of it all. People don't seek drugs because they want to destroy themselves. They seek them because they're trying to survive their pain. Whether it's a wounded soldier, a grieving widow, or a tired factory worker, they're all reaching for the same thing: a pause, a breath, a break from being human for just a little while. Governments pass new laws. Companies issue apologies. Documentaries fill Netflix. Everyone promises reform. But you know how history works. It doesn't vanish. It mutates. When one drug fades, another rises. When one route is blocked, another opens. The poppy's not the villain. It's the mirror. It shows us what we can't handle and what we refuse to learn. You walk outside the hospital into the evening air. The city hums cars, sirens, lives in motion. Somewhere a doctor is writing another prescription. Somewhere else, a teenager is scrolling through his phone thinking he's buying a harmless pill. And in a field far away, a single red poppy sways in the wind, its petals glowing in the dusk. You realize you followed this flower across 5,000 years of history. You've seen it heal kings and break empires, comfort the dying, and enslave the living. It began as mercy, and became money, became war, became silence. Every civilization that touched it swore it could control it. None ever did. The poppy doesn't lie. It gives exactly what it promises, relief, but the price is always hidden until it's too late. So when you see that flower again, on a roadside, in a poem, on a veteran's lapel, remember what it carries. It's not just a symbol of remembrance. It's the oldest confession humanity ever made. We'd rather feel nothing than feel pain. And somewhere under a soft evening breeze, the poppy whispers again, patient, timeless, undefeated. For 5,000 years, opium-shaped empires numbed pain and blurred the line between healing and destruction, a single flower trading peace for power, until even science joined the cycle. But addiction didn't end with the poppy. It simply changed flavor. Now let's step into 18th century London, where another liquid ruled the streets: gin. You wake up to the smell of London. The year is somewhere around 1720, and the air itself feels tipsy. Before you even open your eyes, it hits you sour grain, rotting fruit, a whiff of something that's either yeast or regret. The streets hum with the rhythm of wooden carts and slurred laughter, and you quickly realize sobriety here is the odd one out. Welcome to the gin craze, when the entire city decided that the cure for everything from heartbreak to the common cold was distilled and sold by the pint. You step outside your cramped room, and there it is, a gin shop every few steps. Painted signs promise drunk for a penny dead, drunk for two. The liquid that was once medicine has become morning routine. Even infants are spoon-fed gin to calm their cries, because who can afford milk when spirits are cheaper? Picture this, an economy where you can buy a mug of ruin for less than the price of bread. You might wonder, how did it come to this? It started innocently enough. The Dutch brought Genever, a juniper-based spirit, to England when William of Orange took the throne. The English, always eager to improve upon a foreign import, distilled it stronger, faster, cheaper. They dropped the ever and called it gin. And since imported French wine and brandy were taxed to punish France, the poor turned to homegrown liquor that felt patriotic to drink. It was democracy in a bottle everyone could afford to forget. You pass a group of laborers outside a workshop, their breath fogging in the chill morning air. Each one clutches a small bottle like a newborn child. They drink before work, during work after work. A bricklayer smiles at you with half his teeth and says, "Keeps the cold away, mate." You're not sure he's wrong. London is damp and unforgiving. But as the day goes on, the same gin that warms also numbs, until bodies stumble through alleys like puppets without strings. Inside a tavern, the floorboards creak under the weight of shared misery. A mother hums a lullaby to a baby asleep on the bar, the child's lips still sticky with gin. The bartender, his face red as a beet, wipes mugs with a rag that hasn't been clean since the last century. "Everyone's got their poison," he says with a grin. You can't tell if he's joking. If you've ever seen someone scrolling endlessly on a phone today, searching for an escape from their thoughts, you'd understand the 18th century Londoner perfectly. Gin was their screen time, cheap, addictive, and available everywhere. Except this addiction didn't drain your attention span. It drained your life. In just a few decades, the average death rate in London climbed faster than its church spires. As you walk along the cobbled lanes, you catch sight of a sign hanging above a shop, Madame Geneva's. That's what the people call Gin Madame Geneva, like a lover who promises comfort and leaves you bankrupt. Behind the counter, a woman with tired eyes pours out cloudy liquid from a wooden cask. It smells faintly of turpentine. Most gin of the era isn't just bad, it's lethal. Distillers cut it with sulfuric acid or even sawdust to stretch profit. Still, people line up coins ready. Somewhere down the street, a preacher shouts from a soapbox about the devil's brew and the ruin of souls, but his words dissolve into laughter. For many, gin is less about sin and more about survival. It dulls hunger, erases grief, and offers the poor something the rich can't monopolize: oblivion on demand. A stray dog trots by, lapping up a puddle of spilled gin. A beggar chuckles. Even the dogs are drunk these days. You smile weakly because it's true. London itself feels drunk. And you can almost hear the city breathing through the steam of distilleries, its heartbeat measured by the clinking of empty bottles. If you close your eyes, you can imagine the sound, a chorus of hiccups, coughing, laughter, and crying blending together in one strange hymn of human escape. This isn't just intoxication, it's anesthesia for an empire built on exhaustion. You can't tell where the party ends and the despair begins, but you'll soon see where that despair leads. For now, you just keep walking past one gin shop after another until the line between celebration and catastrophe blurs completely. You find yourself deeper in the maze of London's alleys, where the real stories breathe through cracked shutters and whispered trades. Here, gin isn't just a drink. It's currency, consolation, and curse all at once. Mothers clutching infants barter their last possessions for a small measure because nothing else quiets a hungry child faster than a drop of gin-laced milk. You watch a woman trade a loaf of stale bread for half a cup, her hands shaking, eyes unfocused. Her child giggles in her arms, drunk before learning to walk. It's horrifying, but to her it's mercy. The slums smell like vinegar and sweat, the air heavy with soot from 1,000 chimneys. Mud cakes your shoes as you step over broken glass, and worse. In a corner, an old man stirs a cauldron of home-brewed gin behind a curtain made from rags. He grins at you with 2 teeth left, muttering they call it Dutch courage. keeps a man standing when life won't. You glance at the milky liquid and wonder if it's courage or poison that fills his cup. Everywhere you look, women are selling gin on doorsteps in cellars from wheelbarrows. It's one of the few trades they can own in a city that owns them. The gin shops of Georgian London are often no more than wooden booths or basement holes. Behind one, a thin girl, barely 16, lifts a bottle and says, "You want it strong." She might as well be selling salvation. In truth, the city's gin trade is run by women, the mother gin vendors who both nurture and destroy their neighborhoods. A preacher once called them the midwives of damnation. Maybe that was unfair, or maybe not. One look around, and you see a strange democracy of despair. Men stagger home, broke. Women stumble out, broke. And children watch both with eyes too old for their age. There's no line between victim and participant. Everyone's caught in the same fog. It's said that by 1730, the average Londoner drank nearly 2 pints of gin a week. Some reports exaggerate, others understate, but the truth is clear. This wasn't a small habit. It was a movement. Picture modern caffeine culture, but with ruin in every cup. You know how today's coffee slogans say, "But first coffee." In Georgian London, the sign might have read, "But first forget." You pass an alley where 2 women are arguing over a bottle. Their voices crack, and one suddenly bursts into tears. She kneels beside a wooden cradle where a baby lies still. You feel your stomach twist. The other woman looks at you and mutters, "Just a drop to help her sleep." The baby's lips are blue. A moment of silence hangs before someone laughs nervously, as if laughter can chase death away. It's not all tragedy, though, at least not in appearance. Some gin shops thrive like carnivals. Musicians play fiddles, and men dance with their hats sideways. A butcher's apprentice brags about drinking 10 cups straight, the crowd cheering him on. You half expect a street vendor to start selling hangover insurance. Yet even as they laugh, the undertone is unmistakable. They're celebrating not life, but the brief escape from it. Politicians and pamphleteers start noticing the chaos. One writer calls London a city drowned in spirits. Another, Daniel Defoe, the same man who wrote Robinson Crusoe, warns that gin is turning the working class into walking corpses. The newspapers coin phrases like "drunk for a penny," not as humor, but as social commentary. Still, moral outrage competes with business profit, and business is booming. You wander towards St. Giles, one of the poorest areas in the city, where gin distilleries sprout like mushrooms after rain. The street vendors shout over one another, the smell of burning malt filling the air. Somewhere nearby, a church bell tolls, but it's lost under the din of drunken songs. A mother stumbles by, carrying a bucket of gin as if it were holy water. You can't help but think, when faith fails, people will drink belief instead. A passing constable leans against a lamppost half asleep, his own flask swinging from his belt. Enforcement is a joke. Even the law drinks. Some reformers call for compassion, others for punishment. But no one seems to have the cure. Because how do you fix a society where despair is cheaper than bread? And yet, amid this madness, there's something oddly human about it. These people aren't monsters. They're tired. The Industrial Revolution hasn't yet given them machines to blame, only misery to swallow. The city feels like it's grieving something. Its innocence, its order. Maybe it's soul. You can't quite tell. As night falls, lamps flicker through the fog. You pass another gin shop. Its window cracked, its laughter spilling out. You're no longer sure where pity ends and understanding begins. For all its chaos, London is alive, drunk, desperate, but undeniably alive. And somewhere, the next morning's hangover is already waiting. By now, you've realized gin isn't just a poor man's poison. It's a social equalizer with a cruel sense of humor. From the dirtiest alley to the grandest townhouse, the same clear liquid seeps through every wall. You walk toward Covent Garden, where perfumed ladies and powdered men sip the same drink that keeps beggars warm in the gutter. It's the first time in British history that rich and poor share the same addiction, one nation under gin, inebriated for all. Step into one of those fancier establishments, and the difference is mostly aesthetic. Here, gin comes in crystal glasses, not tin mugs. The patrons boast of juniper notes as if they were wine connoisseurs, though they'll end up under the same table as any dock worker by night's end. You overhear a merchant laughing. A little gin keeps the heart light. His eyes are glassy. You can't help but wonder, how light can a heart get before it floats away completely? The economy loves this new obsession. Distilleries bloom like weeds across the city. By the 1730s, over 7,000 licensed gin cellars operate in London alone, not counting the thousands more who pour illegally. The government taxes grain for bread, not for spirits, so distilling remains cheap. Farmers sell their surplus barley, not for food but for drink. It's as if the entire agricultural system has been repurposed to fuel intoxication. You can almost imagine the fields themselves swaying from the fumes. Everywhere, slogans pop up. Drink for joy. Gin. The friend of the working man. You chuckle because it sounds eerily like a modern advertisement. Swap the product, and the message still fits. Energy drinks, social media fast food. It's all the same promise of instant comfort. Only the flavor changes. But even in its madness, the gin craze has a rhythm, a strange poetry of survival. Taverns pulse with laughter. Fiddlers scrape away tunes while boots stomp in time. A sailor sings of lost loves. A butcher shouts a toast, and a maid giggles until she forgets why she's laughing. You watch, half amused, half saddened. No one here wants to remember only to dissolve for a few blessed hours. You pass through the heart of Westminster, where the same fog of spirits floats out of gentlemen's clubs. Politicians who preach temperance in daylight toast to liberty with gin at night. William Hogarth, the satirical artist, captures it all in his sketches. Faces, swollen eyes, drooping streets overflowing with vice. His art becomes a mirror to the era, forcing the highborn to confront their reflection in the faces of the drunk poor. Even the prisons smell of gin. Debtors drink to forget their debt. Wardens drink to endure their job. The irony would be funny if it weren't so bleak. You meet one prisoner who chuckles. They say gin kills pain. Well, I suppose we're all dying painlessly then. You can't decide whether to laugh or sigh. At the docks, sailors pour gin over wounds before setting sail. They believe it keeps infections away, and perhaps, in a small way, it does. Gin was, after all, originally medicinal. But by now, it's medicine in the same way fire is warmth, helpful until it burns everything down. Still, it isn't all decay. In drawing rooms, the wealthy transform gin into cordials flavored with spices or citrus. They rename it Punch Ratafia Aqua Mirabilis. The illusion of refinement hides the same oblivion. You overhear a duchess giggling behind a fan. It's not gin, darling. It's medicine for the nerves. Sure, and arsenic is a vitamin. You stop by a theater where actors stumble through their lines, their flasks hidden in costume pockets. The audience cheers louder when the jokes slur. The city laughs at itself, too drunk to notice the tragedy playing out in real time. Beneath the noise, you can almost hear the empire's heartbeat slowing, like a body too long deprived of sleep. And yet, there's something mesmerizing about it. The way gin connects everyone, like invisible threads soaked in spirit. It's democracy before democracy, a shared experience of forgetting. Maybe that's why people defend it so fiercely. You can take their bread, their wages, even their pride, but not their escape. Somewhere in all this, the government begins to notice the math. Too many drunk workers means fewer soldiers, fewer taxes, fewer babies surviving infancy. The country that conquered oceans is now drowning in its own cups. You can sense the coming tension in the air, a hangover waiting for a law to arrive. Still tonight, the party goes on. You walk past flickering lamplight through the heartbeat of the empire's intoxication, knowing it can't last forever. But for now, London raises another glass and laughs at the very idea of tomorrow. You turn a corner, and suddenly, you're inside a painting. The world around you looks like it's been sketched by a mad artist with ink made of gin and tears. This is Hogarth's London, the city that gave us the most famous hangover in art history, Gin Lane. The streets you tread feel half real, half cartoon. A skeletal woman drops her baby off a staircase. A drunken man gnaws on a bone meant for dogs. A barber sharpens his razor while his neighbor lies dead beside him. Every window tells a story. Every shadow hides a sin. The artist, William Hogarth, didn't invent this chaos. He simply copied what he saw. You almost expect him to pop out of an alley sketchbook in hand, muttering, "Don't move." Misery looks better in the light. You walk through his world, one brushstroke at a time. The people here aren't villains. They're exhausted Londoners who traded dreams for drink. Hogarth painted Gin Lane in 1751, the year Parliament finally decided enough was enough. But decades before that, this nightmare was daily life. He paired it with another image beer street, a brighter scene full of hard-working citizens drinking beer instead of gin. Moral lesson beer builds nations, gin destroys them. It's propaganda with a moral hangover. Look around you. Hogarth's characters still move. A mother dozes on the steps, her child slipping from her arms. Behind her, a carpenter sells his tools to buy one more mug. In the distance, the pawnbroker grins. You realize you're walking through the moral panic of an entire empire, one painted in sweat and despair. If you've ever seen modern political cartoons online with exaggerated faces and bold captions, you've seen Hogarth's descendants at work. He was the meme maker of his time, mocking politicians, moralists, and drunks alike. Except his jokes bit deep. His prints weren't just sold to the rich. They were pasted on tavern walls, seen by everyone. He turned art into public conscience long before viral meant anything other than disease. Still, the people didn't suddenly stop drinking because of a drawing. You step into a nearby gin shop and realize how deeply his world still breathes. A sign over the counter reads, "Drunk for a penny." Inside, a soldier is sprawled on the floor, laughing uncontrollably as his comrade tries to drag him upright. The barmaid serves without blinking. She's seen this 1,000 times. "You want Hogarth's gin?" she asks sarcastically. "It's cheaper than salvation." You sip just a drop out of curiosity, and it tastes like raw fire mixed with moldy fruit. It burns so fiercely that you cough until your eyes water. No wonder people lose their minds. It's less a drink, more a dare. Yet for many, that's the charm. Pain that distracts from pain. Outside the city, pulses like a fever dream. A preacher quotes scripture at passing drunks. Wine is a mocker. Strong drink is raging. Someone throws a tomato at him. Nearby, a child tugs at your sleeve, offering a bottle no bigger than your hand. "2 farthings," he whispers. You stare at him, realizing he's been drinking too. His breath smells older than he is. The newspapers love Hogarth's images. They call him a moral surgeon, cutting open London's disease. Even the government uses his art as proof that something must be done. In 1751, the same year Gin Lane was printed, Parliament passes another Gin Act, but it's too late to erase decades of addiction. The damage is cultural now, not chemical. You can regulate alcohol, but not despair. You stop before a wall covered in handbills. Beware the gin. Temptress, children sold for liquor. Save our souls, save our streets. The headlines scream morality, but the alleys keep humming with laughter. The contrast is almost cinematic, like watching a public service announcement between scenes of chaos. In a small workshop nearby, Hogarth himself might have worked scratching copper plates until his hands blistered. He wasn't just painting drunks, he was painting a warning. His art shows what happens when an empire loses balance, faith replaced by intoxication, compassion replaced by commerce. You can't help but think how modern it all feels. Different century, same cravings. And yet, in this swirl of madness, there's beauty too. The flicker of lamplight on cobblestones, the sound of fiddles, somewhere down the lane, the resilience of people who somehow keep living through it. Gin Lane may be collapsing, but London doesn't stop breathing. The poor find humor where none should exist. And Hogarth's brush captures that too, the absurd dignity of those who refuse to disappear. You leave the painting behind, stepping back into the foggy streets where the real and the imagined blur together. The city still feels hungover from its own history, every cobble soaked in stories. And even as the first whispers of reform stir in Parliament, you can tell the cure will be just as messy as the madness. You wake the next morning to the sound of shouting angry voices bouncing between brick walls, the kind that could belong to politicians or drunkards depending on the time of day. This time, it's both. Parliament has finally decided to step in, but as you'll soon see, the government trying to legislate sobriety is like trying to teach a cat not to knock things over. By the early 1730s, the gin craze has reached such absurd levels that even the lawmakers can't ignore it. Murders are up work, output is down, and public drunkenness is so normal that magistrates start arriving to court half-tipsy themselves. One newspaper headline warns of a city sliding into ruin. You might say London was having a national hangover, except it hadn't stopped drinking long enough to feel one. The first attempt at control came with the Gin Act of 1736, a masterpiece of good intentions and terrible execution. Parliament imposed heavy taxes on gin, along with expensive licenses that few could afford. The idea was simple. Make it harder to sell people will drink less. But this is London. If there's one thing the city loves more than gin, it's finding loopholes. Almost overnight, an underground gin economy explodes. People start calling their concoctions by different names to dodge the law: cordial waters, medicinal, spirits, even sober drops. Others resort to creative accounting. They sell gin for free but charge absurd prices for the glass it comes in. One pamphlet jokes, "For a shilling, I'll sell you the glass. What you pour into it is none of my business." You walk through Spitalfields and see illegal distilleries hidden behind bakeries, candle shops, even funeral homes, because nothing says side hustle like brewing gin next to a coffin. The police try to enforce the act, but they're outnumbered, underpaid, and often bribed with the very thing they're supposed to confiscate. Arrest rates soar briefly, then collapse. In 1 year, only 6 people in the entire city managed to be successfully prosecuted. The rest, they're too busy toasting to their own cleverness. In the midst of this legal farce, public riots break out. Crowds tear down the Gin Act posters, chanting "No gin, no king." You almost laugh. It's probably the first protest in history fueled by the thing it's protesting. Even Jonathan Swift, the satirist behind Gulliver's Travels, quips that the poor would sooner give up their clothes than their gin. The government, embarrassed and desperate, repeals the act just a few years later. You pause for a moment, watching the fog curl around Westminster's spires. It's strange how moral panic always seems to arrive late to the party. By the time laws are written, the damage has already been done. Still, reformers don't give up. Pamphlets circulate with titles like "The Drunkard's Downfall" and "The Mother's Warning." They're printed with gruesome illustrations, babies dying in gin-slick cradles, women collapsing in alleys, skeletons holding cups. You'd think it was a horror franchise. By 1751, with pressure mounting and Hogarth's gin lane searing itself into the public imagination, Parliament tries again. The Gin Act of 1751 lowers taxes, but tightens licensing and bans small-scale sales. This time, it works not because people suddenly grow virtuous, but because gin becomes more expensive and harder to find. The government finally realizes you can't legislate morality, but you can tax it into exhaustion. It also helps that the economy shifts. Grain prices rise, making gin production less profitable. Beer becomes fashionable again, the respectable man's drink. Distilleries move toward higher quality production, aiming for the emerging middle class rather than the desperate poor. Slowly, the fog of cheap gin begins to lift, though not entirely. Addiction never really disappears. It just changes neighborhoods. As you walk past the Old Bailey Courthouse, you see a preacher reading from a pamphlet titled "The Cry of the Poor." "Drink is the devil's chain," he shouts. A woman nearby mutters, "Aye," and he's charging rent for it. You smile faintly. The battle between piety and pleasure law and loophole is as eternal as London's reign. And then there are the reformers themselves. People like Henry Fielding, the novelist who also served as magistrate. He campaigns for stricter licensing, arguing that gin doesn't just rot livers, it rots society. His half-blind brother, John Fielding, later founds the Bow Street Runners, London's first real police force. It's poetic, in a way the city sobers up enough to invent law enforcement. Still, not everyone agrees with the crackdown. Some accuse Parliament of hypocrisy, noting that the same nobles who ban gin still drink brandy behind closed doors. Others argue that gin was the poor man's rebellion, a protest in liquid form against a system stacked against him. Maybe both sides are right. After all, the line between justice and self-preservation often depends on who's holding the glass. As the decade ends, London starts to calm. The laughter in taverns grows quieter. The deaths fewer, the headlines less hysterical. The gin craze doesn't vanish, it simply exhales. But you can still feel it in the city's pulse, like a hangover that never quite fades. And as the laws take hold, a new kind of intoxication begins to rise, not in the bottle, but in the drawing rooms of the elite. You leave the slums behind and step into another London one, powdered with perfume and arrogance instead of soot and gin fumes. The doors here open quietly, not creak. The laughter is controlled, the drunkenness polished. Welcome to high society, where the same addiction wears silk stockings instead of rags. In a townhouse near Grosvenor Square, a group of gentlemen gathers around a mahogany table. Their wigs gleam, their snuff boxes glint, and their cups are filled not with wine, but with gin, though they'll never call it that. To them, it's juniper spirit punch or botanical cordial. You can't help but grin. It's the same liquid, just served with better grammar. They raise glasses to liberty and refinement. One quotes Alexander Pope between hiccups, another recites a few lines of Dryden before mispronouncing half of them. Even Isaac Newton, long retired from science, was rumored to enjoy a spirit of juniper or two in his old age, proof that brilliance and indulgence often share the same bottle. You lean against the marble fireplace, watching powdered faces redden with laughter. These are the lawmakers' poets, merchants, and artists of Britain, the very people who denounce the gin craze in pamphlets by day and toast it in secret by night. They sip moderation as performance art, assuring each other they're above the common vice. But if you look closely, the twitch of their hands and the glaze in their eyes say otherwise. Even the women join in. Georgian ladies host tea parties where teapots pour gin-laced mixtures under the innocent name of punch. The lace rustles, the fans flutter, and conversation flows looser than silk ribbons. Somewhere between gossip and philosophy, one of them sighs. It's medicinal, really, for the nerves. You resist the urge to laugh. London's greatest lie is that respectability can dilute sin. Still, their intoxication feels different. For the poor gin was escape. For the elite, it's a symbol. The upper class drinks to belong, not to forget. The irony, Both lose themselves either way. You can almost taste the hypocrisy hanging in the air, sharp as juniper and pride. At the theater, actors perform restoration comedies full of drunk characters, and the audience roars in self-recognition. The Georgian elite finds humor in what ruins the poor. You can't help but think it's like someone laughing at a mirror that hides their own reflection. Even the clergy joins the game. In one famous anecdote, Reverend James Townley hosts a dinner where the punch bowl is so large that guests can float biscuits on its surface. When asked why he tolerates such indulgence, he replies, "The Lord made juniper, and who am I to waste creation?" You half suspect his sermons smelled faintly of citrus and regret. But not all of high society is blind. Moral philosophers and reformers begin to notice that gin isn't the only intoxicant power is too. They argue that the some arrogance that floods the streets with cheap liquor also floods the empire with conquest. A drunkard with a crown is still a drunkard. You recall an anecdote from 1750. A nobleman, Lord Littleton, once arrived at a debate on public drunkenness, so inebriated he had to be carried in. The speech he gave, slurred and grand, began with, "My lords, I rise, if rising it can be called." The crowd laughed, but the metaphor stuck. An empire tipsy on its own ego can't stand forever. You look out a window at the city, below chimneys, belching smoke streets glowing with lanterns. Somewhere down there, a mother cradles her gin bottle like a rosary. Up here, the chandeliers sway slightly, their crystals refracting candlelight like rippling liquid. Two worlds, same dizziness, and yet something shifts. Among the silk and laughter, a few sober voices begin to speak. The philosopher Samuel Johnson calls drunkenness a voluntary madness. The painter Joshua Reynolds urges moderation. Even the King George II quietly bans gin from palace events. It's not morality yet, but maybe embarrassment is the first step up toward conscience. You linger as the night deepens, watching the servants clear silver cups and pour leftover punch into basins. A footman, young and tired, sneaks a sip from the dregs before carrying them away. You see his eyes light up for a second, the same flicker of escape that fills every gin den in London. In that moment, the entire city feels connected from gutter to ballroom by one invisible river of spirits. And when dawn breaks over Mayfair, the drunk noblemen sleep soundly in velvet beds while their sermons on virtue wait to be printed. Outside, the carriages clatter home. The servants yawn and the city's heartbeat slows. But beneath the silence, you can sense the coming reckoning. The body can only take so much fire before it burns. You wake in a cold sweat, your heart pounding like a drum against your ribs. For a moment, you think the earth itself is shaking, but no. It's just your pulse hammering under the strain of last night's gin. Now you know what London has been feeling for years, the human body fighting a war it never agreed to. The hangover of the 18th century wasn't just a headache, it was an epidemic. People are collapsing in the streets, their skin pale, their eyes yellowing. You see a man coughing into a handkerchief and stare as he wipes away blood. Liver disease, gin's silent companion, is spreading faster than gossip in a coffee house. Doctors call it dropsy or gin palsy, elegant names for slow decay. The funny thing is most of them drink too. You follow a physician through the alleys near St. Giles, where he takes notes for a report on the bodily effects of spirituous liquors. His quill scratches across the page, as he mutters, distillation of ruin, corrosion of the soul. You glance at his flask. It's half empty. Hypocrisy, it seems, is medicinal. Inside a makeshift clinic, patients lie on straw mats. Their breath smells like sour apples and metal. A woman's hands tremble so violently she can't hold her child. A man beside her groans, clutching his side. Liver like leather, the doctor whispers. You step back, the air thick with vinegar vomit and despair. And yet, despite everything, someone in the corner hums a tune. Humanity has a dark sense of humor about its own suffering. The science of the time doesn't quite understand addiction. Most still believe gin is a warm liquid that balances the body's humors. You can almost hear the irony, people drinking poison to restore health. Some even prescribe it for stomach pain, childbirth, or depression. In short, if it hurts, drink more. You overhear a conversation between two apothecaries debating whether gin causes madness or merely reveals it. The difference, one says, is academic. He's probably right. The streets are filled with people talking to shadows, laughing at invisible jokes. Some blame the devil, others bad distillation. Either way, the result looks the same. If you've ever experienced caffeine withdrawal, or spent a night glued to a screen, mind buzzing, heart racing, you understand the Georgian body's torment. Addiction isn't just craving. It's corrosion disguised as comfort. The 18th century didn't have a word for dopamine, but they lived it one sip at a time. In a small tavern, you sit beside an old sailor named Tom. His left hand shakes uncontrollably as he lifts his drink. Used to fight the French, he mumbles, "Now I fight me own hands." His voice cracks, but he smiles anyway. Can't quit. The bottle's my last friend. You realize that behind every statistic is a heartbeat like his, fragile, stubborn, and very human. Even the reformers notice the body count rising. William Hogarth's art may have captured the chaos, but pamphleteers like Henry Fielding's An Inquiry into the Causes of the Late Increase of Robbers linked gin directly to crime, poverty, and disease. He writes that gin renders the people cruel and unfit for labor. Reading it today, you can sense the fear. What happens when an empire's workers are too drunk to build the empire? But the truth is more complex. Gin isn't just killing bodies. It's exposing the fragility beneath the empire's pride. Soldiers drink to forget war mothers, to survive hunger laborers, to endure endless toil. In each case, the body becomes a battlefield between despair and defiance. You wander through Smithfield Market, where traders gulp gin before sunrise to steady the nerves. One man stumbles and falls into a barrel of fish. The crowd bursts into laughter before helping him up. You can't tell whether to laugh or cry. It's tragicomedy at its finest, pain turned into public entertainment. Doctors finally begin warning of gin poisoning, describing symptoms that sound eerily familiar. Sleeplessness, tremors, anxiety, despair. You imagine a physician's report that could just as easily describe modern burnout. History changes costumes, but the symptoms stay the same. In one of London's new hospitals, a surgeon explains that too much gin thins the blood and weakens the moral fiber. He might not understand the biology, but he's nailed the metaphor. The moral body of the nation is trembling too. The empire's strength, its workers, its mothers, its soldiers, is leaking out through its own veins. Yet somehow, amid the rot and ruin, life goes on. The baker still kneads dough, the printer still inks pamphlets, and even the drunk soldier at the corner still salutes when the king's coach passes. The human body, it seems, can endure almost anything except indifference. As you step out into the cold, you breathe in air that smells faintly of smoke and juniper. You think of your own body, how easily comfort becomes habit, how habit becomes need. The Georgian Londoners didn't set out to destroy themselves. They just wanted to feel alive. And maybe in that brief warmth between sips, they did. You might think love would have escaped the reach of gin, that something as tender as romance could float above the fumes. But you'd be wrong. In Georgian London, gin didn't just destroy marriages, it sometimes started them. Walk through Vauxhall Gardens or Ranelagh Pleasure Gardens, and you'll see what I mean. Lanterns swinging in the trees, music drifting through the mist, and laughter, slurred, flirtatious, reckless. Here gin was the liquid courage of the lonely. A young apprentice, too shy to speak to his sweetheart, downs 2 cups and suddenly becomes a poet. His words wobble, but his confidence soars. A widow weary of hunger and grief takes a sip to lift her spirits and finds herself dancing with a stranger. There's a strange melancholy beauty to it, the way desire and despair hold hands under the glow of candlelight. The pleasure gardens were the nightclubs of the 18th century, public, extravagant, and scandalous. Musicians played Handel's latest hits while fireworks painted the sky. Couples drifted into shadowy corners, whispering promises they'd forget by morning. The air was perfumed with roses and sweat, and everywhere you turned, someone was either falling in love or falling over. You pause by a fountain, watching a young woman in a powdered wig laugh as she nearly spills her drink. "It's only gin," she says. "Keeps the heart brave." Maybe it does. But you can't help noticing the sadness beneath her smile. In this city, courage and escape often come from the same bottle. Prostitutes, too, found gin both tool and torment. They drank to dull shame to endure the cold, to survive men who treated them like furniture. Many were girls who'd fled the countryside, tricked by promises of work. Mother Gin welcomed them warmly and destroyed them gently. One pamphlet of the time warned that a dram before bed is the surest path to the gallows. Still, the lines outside gin houses never grew shorter. Even respectable marriages weren't immune. Husbands came home swaying wives weighted with bottles instead of arguments. Domestic violence soared. Newspapers carried headlines like, "Wife drowns child in fit of gin madness," grim reminders that beneath every drunken jest was real tragedy. The courts, filled with gin crimes, where desperation met delirium. And yet somehow, love still persisted. You see a young couple, barely 20, sharing a bottle on a bench by the Thames. They're poor barefoot and shivering, but they laugh between sips. "Someday, we'll have a house," he says. "With windows," she adds. Their dreams are fragile but alive, like candle flames trembling in the wind. Maybe that's what gin gave them, a small illusion of control, a belief that tomorrow might still be kind. In polite society, gin worked differently. It loosened tongues at dinner parties turned polite, flirting into scandalous confession. Poets like John Gay and Lord Byron. Yes, that Byron turned intoxication into verse. Byron once joked, "Man being reasonable must get drunk." It's the kind of line that sounds clever, until you realize half the empire agrees. At masquerade balls, masks came off as quickly as reputations. Beneath silk and lace, everyone became equal. Dukes, merchants, actresses, thieves. Gin blurred the boundaries, made courage easy, and consequence distant. You can almost hear the giggles echoing through history, followed by the silence of regret. One diarist of the time, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, wrote that London is a masquerade without end. You believe her. Behind every fan flutter and gentleman's bow lies a faint smell of juniper and denial. The city isn't just drunk. It's lovesick, heartsick, and half asleep. Still not all love stories end in ruin. You pass a narrow chapel on Fleet Street, where a wedding is taking place. The groom's coat is frayed, the bride's hands trembling. The vicar's breath smells faintly of spirits, but his words are sincere. To have and to hold, he says, and for a moment, even in this gin-drenched world, the promise feels pure. You step outside, quietly, letting them have their miracle. But the truth follows you out in Georgian London. Even love was flammable. One spark of gin could warm it or burn it to ash. And as night falls again over the city, you can hear the laughter from the pleasure gardens, mixing with the cries from the slums, both carried by the same wind. The line between romance and ruin has never been thinner. By the mid-18th century, the laughter starts to thin out. The songs fade, the bottles empty, and what's left behind is the shaking silence of a nation waking up hungover. London looks the same on the outside, still bustling, still busy. But if you look closer, you can see the exhaustion written into every face. The gin craze is no longer a wild celebration. It's a ghost that haunts every street. You walk through the marketplace at dawn. The vendors are quieter now, the joke's forced. There's less gin being sold and more bread again, though the air still carries its faint, bitter smell. A preacher stands on a crate reading from a leaflet titled, "A Cry for Reformation." Our nation is sick, he declares, and gin is its fever. His words echo down the street, bouncing off stone walls that have heard it all before. But this time, maybe someone's listening. The reformers have arrived not just with pamphlets, but with purpose. Preachers, doctors, writers, and politicians join forces in what they call the campaign to reclaim the moral body of England. It's an odd phrase, but you understand what they mean. The gin craze has turned into a national hangover, and the country is desperate for a cure. In one of London's growing Methodist chapels, you hear a man named John Wesley speak. His voice is calm but cutting. Drunkenness, he says, is slow self-murder. The congregation nods, some out of faith, some out of guilt. The Methodists begin preaching temperance not by force of law, but by force of conscience. And for once, it works. You can feel a strange new energy, stirring something hopeful, something sober. Artists, too, begin painting a different London. Instead of Gin Lane, they show families at dinner, children at school, workers earning honest wages. The message is clear: virtue is fashionable again. Even the newspapers stop joking about drunks and start praising self-control. The cultural tide is turning. though the undercurrent of temptation still runs deep. One doctor writes in the Gentleman's Magazine that the body politic begins to heal, though the scars remain. You pass a group of women outside a parish home who nod knowingly when they read that line. They've seen too much loss to celebrate, but at least there's something left to rebuild. Gin consumption falls not just because of new laws, but because the city itself changes. The Industrial Revolution begins to hum beneath the surface. Factories rise, wages stabilize, and people discover a new kind of addiction work. The streets that once reeked of alcohol now smell of coal smoke and ambition. You can almost feel the empire sobering up one factory bell at a time. But reform isn't without irony. The same government that condemned gin begins promoting beer as a healthier alternative. Posters show happy workers drinking ale, smiling wives pouring pints. The slogan might as well read, "Drink responsibly for the crown." You can't help but smirk. Even sobriety is a business. Still, for many Londoners, redemption is real. Mothers who once fed gin to infants now serve porridge instead. Men who once pawned boots for a bottle join churches, start savings clubs, or emigrate for work. A few of them even live long enough to tell stories about the madness of the old days. You imagine them shaking their heads with that half-proud, half-ashamed smile, like survivors of a storm they barely remember. The reformers keep pushing. Charity schools open for children, once left to wander the streets. Orphanages expand. Workhouses, for better or worse, replace the gin dens as the city's holding pens for the poor. The moralists may have won, but their victory feels bittersweet discipline instead of joy duty, instead of escape. You stop at St. Giles again, where decades ago the craze was born. The old gin shops are gone now, replaced by cobblers and cloth merchants. The church bell rings, and for the first time in years, no one mocks it. A few drunks still sleep in the alley relics of a dying age, but the crowd step over them instead of joining them. Progress always leaves someone behind. The preachers call it divine justice. The doctors call it recovery. You call it withdrawal. The city is trembling its way back to sanity, sweating out the fever of the last half-century. But the lessons remain carved deep into its conscience. You can't drink your way out of despair. You can only face it one day at a time. And as you stand at the edge of the Thames, watching sunlight glint off the water, you realize the river looks cleaner somehow. Maybe that's imagination. Or maybe the city really is washing itself. Either way, London feels lighter. Not sober, exactly, just awake. You breathe in, and for the first time in a long while, the air smells more of rain than of gin. But in the distance, faintly, the city still hums. Because even as one addiction fades, another always waits its turn. You blink, and the century has changed. The same city that once drowned itself in gin now sips tea with a straight back and steady hand. The fog still lingers, but it smells cleaner of cold rain and redemption. London has sobered up, but you can feel it. The echo of those wild gin-crazed days still hums beneath the cobblestones like a heartbeat the city never quite forgot. You walk through the same streets that once overflowed with drunken chaos, where taverns once blazed with torchlight and screams. You now see polite shop fronts with names like Temperance and Sons. The barmaids have become bakers. The distillers have turned to making perfume, and children who once cried for gin now carry school books. The Georgian era's hangover is fading, but its story lingers in every cautious smile, every carefully poured cup of tea. Tea, the nation's new obsession. Once a luxury, now a ritual. Hot water leaves, and patience replace juniper and fire. You sit at a tea house in Covent Garden, watching a young clerk sip slowly as he reads the Morning Chronicle. The cup trembles slightly in his hand, as though his ancestors are whispering, "Careful, we've been here before." The British Empire has traded intoxication for productivity, but the rhythm is familiar. Different drink, same devotion. The same politicians who once fumbled gin laws now tax tea and coffee with imperial zeal. The message is moral, but the motive is money. Addiction, it turns out, is simply more respectable when it smells like Earl Grey. You can't help but smile at the irony the empire that once stumbled through gin lanes now conquers the world fueled by caffeine. You wander toward the docks and see merchant ships loading crates marked India. Inside lies the empire's new lifeblood, tea, sugar, spices. The moral reform that saved Britain's body now feeds its ambition. Sobriety becomes a brand, a global export. Britain builds its power on order, restraint, and trade. Yet if you listen closely, you can still hear the creak of barrels and the faint slosh of memory. The reformers celebrate this transformation. John Wesley's Methodists established schools and charities. The temperance societies preach self-control as national duty. Posters declare, "Strong minds, not strong drink, build empires." And they're right, partly. The nation's heartbeat steadies. Life expectancy rises. Crime falls. But you can't shake the feeling that something else has been lost, a certain reckless humanity, a rawness that once made even despair feel alive. You meet an elderly woman sweeping her doorstep in Spitalfields. She tells you her grandmother used to sell gin by the pint, said it kept her warm. The woman smiles faintly. Killed her quick, though? She pauses, looking up at the gray sky. Still, she laughed more than I do. The words hang there, soft and honest. Maybe that's the quiet price of progress. By now, the Georgian gin craze has become history taught in schools, moralized in sermons, dramatized on stage. Writers describe it as a dark age of intoxication, a lesson in national weakness. But history has a habit of repeating itself in new disguises. The Victorians have their opium dens, the modern world, its screens and syringes. Every era finds its own bottle to cling to. You stroll past a print shop window and see a reprint of Hogarth's Gin Lane. It's faded now, the paper browned with age. Tourists stop to gawk and laugh at the absurd faces, the chaos, the cartoon misery. None of them smell the rot, hear the coughing, or feel the desperation that once filled those streets. That's the magic of history. It sanitizes what it can't bear to remember. Still, as you keep walking, you can almost feel Hogarth's eyes following you, his ink-stained hand wagging a warning across centuries, not about gin, but about forgetting. Because the real story of the gin craze isn't drunkenness, it's despair, dressed as celebration, poverty disguised as pleasure, humanity trying to stay warm in a cold world. And that you realize is timeless. The bells of St. Paul's begin to toll steady and clear. You stop and listen. London feels calm, almost serene. But deep beneath the cobblestones, under the polite tea shops and polished carriages, the ghosts of Madame Geneva still stir. Maybe they always will. History, like gin, leaves its aftertaste long after the glass is empty. As twilight settles, the city glows gold against the river. You breathe in the scent of rain and coal, and maybe just faintly juniper. Somewhere, a violin plays a slow tune that feels centuries old, and in that sound, you hear it the heartbeat of an empire that fell rose and learned to sip instead of gulp. You smile, tracing the rim of your teacup, as if it were a glass from another age. Then you whisper the truth. Every Londoner of that era eventually learned too much of anything. Pleasure, power, piety turns poison. Moderation, not morality, is what saves you. And as you set your cup down, the city exhales. The hangover has passed, but the lesson lingers warm and bitter on the tongue of history. So now, as the fog of old London fades and the last echo of laughter drifts away, rest with the thought that history, like gin, always leaves a trace. The city learned to sip, not drown, to live, not escape. Close your eyes, breathe slow, and let the past pour gently into your dreams.